Hello, everyone. Today is May 4th, 2021. I'm here with Taylor Rotunno. Taylor is a graduate of the Skaggs School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences at UC San Diego, a pharmacist, a financial freedom advocate, and the co-founder of the Rokwoan Property Group. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Taylor.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you, man.
You're welcome. So, how was your experience the in pharmacy school?
It was definitely demanding as far as the amount of time you had to put in it. I wouldn't say it was necessarily conceptually too difficult as long as you put the amount of time that was required. I would say there was, some kids that, got things just really easily in there, and there was other people who, it took a little bit longer for them to get the information. But ultimately, as long as you're putting in enough time, I think anyone can really, succeed in doing that. It's not like, oh, only smart people are, in pharmacy school or something like that. So, but it was a good experience overall.
How did it compare to your undergrad?
Um, it was, I would just say, a little bit more focused as far as the classes. But even still in pharmacy school, the first year in particular, I would say you're really doing a lot of things that aren't necessarily things you're going to be using a lot in your daily practice. It's still kind of things that are building a foundation where, I'm sure most people feel the same way in undergrad, their first couple of years. It's, a lot of history or I don't know, sociology, or just classes that are just, you take it one time and you never really use it again ever in your career or something like that. So I feel like it was like that in the beginning, but not as much as undergrad was. And then afterwards, it's just a little bit more focused on, specifically what you're trying to do in your career, obviously, compared to undergrad where they don't really know what you're going to do in your career. They're just like teaching classes, and you could do a lot of different things based on, whatever particular degree you're doing.
Yes, and even in high school when you have to choose, majors in colleges, that's nearly impossible.
Oh yeah, it's I definitely say it's very important to have uh, that insight and really do some digging early on to figure out really what drives you and why you're in school. Because the people that I've found that tend to do the best are the ones that have a goal that's sitting there at the end and they're working towards that goal. If they don't really have a goal, they're just kind of at school because it was a cultural norm or their parents pressured them and they're kind of just taking classes, but they don't really see it and end goal. They're just there. I don't think those people, it's a little bit harder to stay up late studying when you don't see like what's going to happen at the end of when you get out of that college. How is that going to benefit your life? So I feel like having that goal at the end really helps.
Having that goal is huge. I think for myself, I was one of those people that kind of took college day by or undergraduate day by day and didn't see that goal at the end that, what you want to gain from this experience here. And you're right, without that end sight in mind, what's the point of spending, the night studying when you can go out, be with friends, or do something fun, quote unquote?
Exactly. It comes that short term versus long term. Am I going to make myself happy now in the short term, or am I going to kind of delay that gratification and get twice as much gratification, but down the road? And can I wait for it, or do I need that gratification right now?
Yes, that's a constant battle. Did you feel did you feel you had that end goal in mind during your undergraduate experience your graduate experience?
Yeah,
Or
I'd say yeah, when I graduated high school, I kind of already had it in my mind that I at least wanted to try to go the pharmacy route. So I immediately after graduating high school studied to take the pharmacy technician. I think it's called the PTCB, pharmacy technician certification exam. I took that, and then essentially that's really the only barrier to getting a pharmacy technician license. So a few months later, I found a job and essentially worked all throughout undergrad as a pharmacy tech, kind of dipping my foot in the water, so to speak, to see if I liked it. And at the same time was cognizant that I wanted to try to get into pharmacy school, which I think did set me up for success, because I see so many people who, they kind of realize what they want to do by their third year, and like their GPA is shot by that point. And, they really, do well the last 2 years, but, you only can raise your GPA so much after you've, not taken it as seriously the first couple of years. So I feel like that really did benefit me, that I had that motivation and that goal early on. And I knew that I wanted to try to do pharmacy, and I knew how competitive it was to get in. So I kind of told myself, if I'm going to do this, I have to go all out from the beginning, in order to achieve that goal. If not, it's not even worth, trying to do if I don't go 100%.
Nice. What attracted you to pharmacy right out of high school? That's awesome that you were able to do that and realize that you knew what you wanted at such a young age.
Yeah, I would say I've always naturally liked math and science courses much more than your English or history. So I think it kind of started there, and something about drugs and the way they affect people's body just really interested me, more than other fields of science. I'd say biology in particular was the classes I liked the most, more than chemistry or physics or something like that. So I really, kind of just wanted to learn as much of that stuff as possible. And the more I learned, the more, fascinated I became with all of it, I think.
And what is the role of a pharmacy technician compared to that of a pharmacist?
Really, the technician can do most of what the pharmacist is doing. The pharmacist's main job, I would say, is, they're the last line of defense in many cases of the patient putting that drug in their mouth, or, an IV drug in their system. So, all the time, whether people realize it or not, I mean, doctors, nurses, everyone makes, mistakes. You think like, oh, doctors are the smartest people, they don't make mistakes. Like, no, they make a lot of mistakes, so you really have to be cognizant of, did the doctor intend to do what he actually, prescribed here, or is this a mistake? And there's kind of that balance between, I don't want to bother the doctor, but I really feel that this could cause patient harm in this case. So you're kind of walking that fine line. But the technician doesn't really do any of that analysis of whether something is, correct or not. They're really just aiding in the patient getting the drug. So whether it's doing the typing up all the information needed for the prescription, or filling a drug, or filling an IV bag, they're helping with all of that. But essentially the final check, it's all on the farm. Even if the tech does something wrong and they mislabel it, it's all on you in the end to make sure that any errors are caught. So that's where I really try to keep my focus and not get distracted. That, ultimately, if patient harm, happens, I really try to make sure that it's not coming from me, and then I catch as much as possible. But ultimately, there's always going to be some level of patient harm. You just try to minimize it as much as possible.
And how was you as an undergrad, did you start at 18 as a pharmacy tech?
Yes, I was 18 and 9 months when
Is
I
that,
first got my first job.
oh, the exact.
I remember the month I got hired, because I studied after high school in the summer to do that test. And then I think I took the test, I don't remember, like in August or September. And then it took me like 3 or 4 months to finally land a job. And I got a job in December, working in Del Mar at, it was a Save-On Albertsons at the time. It's since changed ownership a couple times, but I worked there for 8 years, that same store.
Wow.
Yeah.
And were you younger than most of the other people in the pharmacy?
So there were a couple people who were, older. When I say older, like in their 30s, I would say. But for the most part, you'd be surprised that most of the people in pharmacy school are 22 or 23 right when they get in. It seems like I guess the people who are the most motivated, they just don't waste a lot of time. And, they probably were similar to me in that they had that goal, and like their mind was set on it and they just went for it, and it kind of takes a a certain level of dedication. I'm watching my girlfriend apply right now to try to get into nursing school, and it's just reminding me of the competitiveness. It almost seems like, I mean, I could be wrong about this, but it seems like the nursing school is almost more competitive than pharmacy school is. It's crazy. Yeah.
Wow. That's saying something too. And nursing school is very competitive.
Yeah. It's a definitely very in-demand job. That's for sure.
In demand for sure. Is pharmacist an in demand job?
Um, I would say no. I would say the prospects of supply and demand for a pharmacist is poor right now. I think the supply of pharmacists, there's a lot of schools that have popped up in the last 20 or 30 years. And there's not really a lot of regulation for, schools that could open. I mean, me and you could open up our own school if we wanted to, as long as we met the requirements of the school. So there's a lot of for-profit, schools that are coming on, and it's kind of flooding the market with a lot of talent. And ultimately, there's not a lot of jobs to absorb all that talent. So I think eventually it's probably going to put downward pressure on our salaries, but I don't think we've quite seen that yet. But maybe that's coming in the future. We'll see.
Those, for profit schools, and if they're fairly new, they might not have as good of an education as, say, UC San Diego's pharmacy school,
Uh-huh.
which is ranked first in the nation. Is
No, it's definitely not first in the nation. It's definitely, I haven't looked at the rankings recently. I think when I was in school, it was about in the 20-ish range, if I remember correctly. The UCSF has consistently been 1, 2, or 3. It kind of flip-flops all the time, but I know a lot of our curriculum is similar to theirs, but we hadn't been a school nearly as long as they had. So part of it could have been because of that. We just don't have the prestige of, being a school for 50 years or 70 years or however long they've been a school. But it was definitely a very good school nonetheless. And I don't know that the rankings necessarily provide a lot of merit in themselves. Maybe in certain spots, but from what I've seen, I don't think that where people graduated school has as much of impact, at least in the pharmacy world, as of where you get hired of maybe some other professions do. I feel like a lot of people from whatever schools, get hired at the places that I've worked.
Wow. How
Yeah.
many different pharmacies have you worked at?
Only, well, so I've interned and done a bunch of different rotations and stuff with school, but as far as actually been paid and employed, only 2 different places. The Save on Albertsons that I was saying, they changed ownership, like I said, 2 different times, but I was physically in the same spot. So that was there 8 years. And then once I graduated pharmacy school, I started working for Palomar Health at that time. And I've
Okay.
been there ever since 2016 when I graduated pharmacy school.
Wow, 5 years.
5 years,
That's
yeah.
that's awesome to only have 2 jobs in,
Oh, I take that back. I did have one other job that I worked for about 10 months at a place called Med Watchers. It was a little bit different type of job where essentially you call people on the phone and you go over their medication lists to find discrepancies, drug interactions, maybe they're taking it incorrectly, things of that nature. So you're just trying to find ways they can optimize their medication regimen. So I did that for about 10 months as well. I forgot about that.
how was that? That sounds pretty hard.
I liked the job itself. The thing that I didn't like is the pay structure. It was commission. And I think I realized very quickly that commission just wasn't good for my mental health. It was, the computers would break, they'd be down for 4 hours and it's like, you're there and there's nothing you can do about it, but you're not getting paid, and it's like, it's frustrating when things like that happen. So I always think about it even till this day, whenever I'm at my current job and the computers break or something, like, well, at least I'm still getting paid.
Yes.
It could be worse.
It could be worse.
It's stressful. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Thank goodness I don't do a commission either, but you're always like, it's kind of like school in the sense that you're never off the clock. If
Yeah, not really. Yeah.
I mean, salespeople, I mean, I think they maybe be able to walk the fine line, but I think I'm on your boat in the sense that I just, give me a X amount and then that's good.
Yeah, there's pros and cons. I mean, I'll definitely say it's not like it's all cons, but I just think for me, it wasn't for me. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
How many years was the trend did you take between your undergrad and your graduate school?
I didn't have any gap. So I was applying my fourth year of undergrad to pharmacy school. And then uh, trying to remember what I even did this summer in between. I can't remember. I probably just worked. But yeah, there was no gap in between the two. And it was both at UCSD because I was at UCSD for undergrad and for pharmacy school. So it was at the same spot. So it was kind of a seamless transition. I still had my same job. I was still at the same school. Um, I moved to a different spot in La Jolla, but my life, I guess, didn't change all that much as it would for someone else who has to, relocate or something like that.
Absolutely. My friend is right now, he's lived in Southern California his whole life and just got into psychology school in Colorado for, a 5-year program. So in 3 months, he's about to pick up and leave uh, his whole life.
It's a big change. Yeah.
It's a big change. I was about to ask, how, what was it like for you applying? Were you nervous about possibly, not getting into UCSD and possibly moving?
I mean, sure. I mean, so UCSD was my number one choice the whole time. So of course, I want to go there. I think it was good that it wasn't my very first interview that I had. Just a quick story. So the first interview I ever had was at the University of Oklahoma. There's probably about 40 kids there at the interview, and I'm one of two people there that didn't have like a full, blazer suit on. I was just, I didn't. Yeah, so I didn't have the full wardrobe. So like immediately, like my confidence is kind of like, oh shoot, like did I mess up here? So kind of just, I'd never done this before, so kind of just making those hiccups. And I didn't even end up getting into that school. So I think it was good practice that I had a few interviews before. But I did get accepted to, I think, 3 or 4 schools before UCSD. And it was like each time I got accepted to a school, I liked the previous school a little bit more than the one that I had already been accepted to. And you have to pay a deposit each time. Like they give you like a week to pay a deposit or you lose your spot. So I think I paid like 3 or 4 different deposits because each time I liked the school a little bit more than the last one I just got accepted to. So
Wow. And
yeah,
how
it
much were the deposits?
was like 500 to 750 bucks, I think. Yeah, it's a
Anything they
scam.
can do. Yeah,
Yeah,
seriously.
yeah, yeah. And UCSD. So I mean, UCSD does it right in that UCSD doesn't actually charge that fee, but they make it so that all the other schools are going to do it to you because UCSD is one of the last schools, at least when I applied, they're the one of the last ones to get back to you. So, if they got back to you early, then they actually could have saved, me a lot of, money from doing that. But the fact that they get there, last, you may not have to pay a deposit, but you're going to have to pay a deposit to all the other schools
Yeah.
anyway, since they get back to you so late. So,
Oh man.
yeah.
What was the timeline there? Like, was it January to March?
Something like that. It was in that range. I think maybe February is, yeah, I was applying in January and February, I think, and then maybe March is when you get acceptance letters. I could be off on that, but I think that's right.
Okay. And you said the first year you did a lot of general education. Was it mostly biology related
There
education?
was a chemistry class that I remember. Um, we did histology, which that's like the study of tissues under the microscope, which really has nothing to do with what we do as pharmacists. So it's kind of interesting that we had to take something like that. I have a feeling. So just a little background is a lot of our curriculum is in concert with the medical school there. The whole second year curriculum we actually take the first year medical students and the second year pharmacy school students pretty much do most of their curriculum together that year. So we do a lot of things that the medical school does, and the fact that we have a medical school there, I think we take maybe some different classes than maybe other pharmacy schools would. So I think histology and anatomy were two, I think, that were the first year that were kind of, I mean, anatomy is a little bit more interesting, but I mean, still, you're not cutting into people as a pharmacist.
Or observing their tissue much.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, in the end, I really do feel like the curriculum could be condensed to, so the pharmacy school is 3 years didactic and 1 year rotations. I think it definitely could have been condensed to 2 years didactic, 1 year rotation, especially considering that the medical school only does 2 years of didactic. So if the medical school is only doing 2 years, why would a pharmacist need to do 3 years? It doesn't make any sense to me, but
They want that third year of tuition.
sure, exactly. Precisely.
Oh man.
Yeah.
When did you pick a specialty in school?
In pharmacy school?
Yes.
When I was there, I really thought I was just going to be a retail pharmacist the whole time, and not do a residency, which at our school, we're really pushed to try and do a residency, but you don't really need it for a retail job. So that was kind of my mindset the whole time. And then the last year, I kind of had a little bit of, I don't know if you'd say a change of heart, but I thought, I guess my mindset was that it would at least provide some good job security, even if I went back and did retail anyway and I had the residency. So in the end, I ended up doing what they call ambulatory care residency, which ambulate to walk. Essentially, it's patients who aren't, bedridden. So you're managing chronic disease states, diabetes, asthma, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, things like that. Things where people aren't, gravely sick. So I did a 1 year residency in that in the end. So that was kind of like a last second applying.
What did that residency look like?
It was similar to the last year of pharmacy school, where essentially you rotate every like 4 to 6 weeks to a different, rotation of learning different things. So let me even try to remember what that rotation looked like. I did 3 6-week blocks of ambulatory care. So doing those disease states that I just mentioned. You have a acute care hospital, which is working as essentially like a hospital, a pharmacist, treating the patients in the hospital. We had a big project that we had to present at the end of the year. So we're kind of working on that concurrently through the year. We had a medication safety rotation. I know I'm definitely missing some, but there's a lot of different, electives you could take, like, for example, infectious disease, cardiology, pain, any number of disease states or things like that, compounding pharmacy. So whatever you're interested in, but the residency was about 2/3 acute care and 1/3 ambulatory care, which I wish it was flip-flop because I wanted to do ambulatory care, but the whole process is a matching system where you apply and you rank the schools and the schools rank you, and then you either match with the resident, or not the schools, the providers, hospital systems, I should say, or chains, or wherever you're going. So you guys rank each other, and that's where I ended up going. I think it was probably my 4th or 5th choice, but in the end, I'm glad I didn't have to leave San Diego, so it all worked out in the end.
Nice. What? So this healthcare provider, who was it?
It's Palomar Health. So where I did the residency is where I'm currently working. So I stayed on afterwards after I finished. I was only working as a per diem for those 10 months that I was working at MedWatchers. So I was kind of just keeping my foot in the door because I knew I really liked Palomar. And it it was my mindset that ultimately I think I wanted to try to get a full-time job there if it opened up. So it eventually did.
Nice. And
Yeah.
what does an ambulatory care, what's your day-to-day tasking for that position?
Yeah. So I've done 5 main roles, I guess. The 5 things I've done is, one, just your typical retail pharmacist, but in the hospital. So whenever someone gets discharged and they have their medications they're going home with, I'm that pharmacist who's making sure that they get the right things when they go home. I work as a anticoagulation pharmacist, so people who are on chronic blood thinners. I essentially interpret the lab results of their blood test and then advise them on what dose to take of their medication, if they need to change it or not. And then ultimately when they need to go back into the lab for repeat lab tests. And then I do what's called specialty pharmacy, which these are the injectable biologics. In many cases, they're for disease states where you have a hyperactive immune system. So psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, things like that, where your immune system essentially is on overdrive, and these drugs essentially make your immune system not work as effectively in treating the disorder. So essentially it's similar to the outpatient pharmacy where you're receiving prescriptions, but it's a little bit more hands-on in that these drugs are extremely expensive. So you need to make sure there's not any waste, and you're making sure that they're taking their medication in a timely fashion and not wasting it, because there's thousands of dollars in these biologics. It's big money in those drugs.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I'm not currently doing, actually I said 5, so there's been 3 so far. So the other 2 that I'm not currently doing anymore, but I have at one point, was I was the refill pharmacist at Arch Healthcare, which they have a partnership with Palomar. It's essentially like a family practice doctor's office. So whenever the physicians would get refills from the pharmacies for all their patients, I was the one who was approving or not approving the refills on behalf of the doctor based on the most recent assessment that the patient had with the doctor. So I was reading their notes and seeing if there's drug interactions and things like that, and ultimately sending in those refills for the patients. And then the last thing that I'm not doing is the treatment of chronic disease states, kind of like a family practice doctor. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. Those are the big 3 that I was doing the most. But as of right now, once COVID hit, that kind of got slashed out of my job description for now, but we'll see if I end up doing that again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think how has your job been since COVID hit? Have you still gone into your workplace?
I personally have never worked from home since COVID started. So I've been no change at all. I mean, I wear a mask at work, and there's plexiglass, at the pharmacy and things like that. But other than that, that's really the only change.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're still in ambulatory care. That's your job now?
Yes. Yes. So I mean, in many cases, it's kind of split between your ambulatory care or your acute care. And acute care is you're treating hospitalized patients, or ambulatory care, you're treating patients who are not hospitalized. So, in the one case when I work as the outpatient pharmacist, the patients were just hospitalized, but now they're going home. So I'm kind of like that transition pharmacist in between, them being in the hospital and them going home, and ultimately making sure that, the medications that they're on before coming into the hospital, and then the medications they're prescribed on discharge, that everything is cohesive there and that there's not any problems.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's ambulatory and acute?
Acute care.
Okay. And then the outpatient one is kind of the in between.
Yeah.
Got it. And this residency, it is an extra year. It's not overlapping with your rotation year.
Exactly. So the
Okay.
rotations are not paid. You're actually paying tuition to the pharmacy school the last year while you're doing the rotations. Whereas the residency, you are paid, although not nearly as much as a pharmacist normally makes. And that could be 1 to 2 years for a pharmacist, at least for residency
Okay.
that you would do. Normally, the first year is you either do like an ambulatory care or an acute care residency. And then the second year is if you want to specialize. So you do acute care the first year, and then the second year you do oncology or infectious disease or pain or something like that the second year. So I
You
didn't do a specialty.
okay.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to leave it open because I feel like when you specialize, um, you're really narrowing down the amount of jobs that are available for you in the U.S. So I feel like a lot of people who do those types of jobs, they really have to move to their job. Where I knew I wanted to try and stay in San Diego, and for me, living in San Diego was more important than necessarily doing a exact thing that I wanted to practice in. So it really comes down to what's most important to you, you know, doing the type of work that you want to do or living where you want to live.
That's a huge question we all need to ask ourselves.
It's a tough question.
It's
Yeah.
a tough question. I don't think it was too tough for me or you, because I'm on your boat. Like when I first started applying for jobs, there was no question. You know, it was only San Diego jobs. You know, whatever jobs for an engineer in San Diego, that's pretty much my filter right there. And I know some people aren't like that, that they're like, "Ooh, there's an amazing job up in the Bay, you know, that pays X amount, but I'm gonna have to pick up my whole life and go over there." And it's like, if that's what you value, then go for it.
Exactly. I think that's well said. It's really what you value in the end. What is the bigger picture of why you're taking that job?
Yes. So what is Palomar Health? What is Palomar Health?
It's a health system, that they have different specialties within the hospital itself. Orthopedic surgery and things like that. And then they also have different medical groups now that are affiliated with it. So Graybill and Arch, those are the outpatient providers. So, if you were to go see we don't have psychiatry. What do we have? We have cardiology, we have pediatrics, um, we have gastroenterology, we have ophthalmology, um, we have an urgent care, family practice, internal medicine. So all the different types of doctors that you would see on an outpatient basis if you were to just call up your doctor and schedule an appointment. So that's all affiliated with Palomar as well. And then we have another hospital in Poway in addition to Escondido, which it used to be called the Pomerado Hospital, but they kind of rebranded it Palomar Poway so that everyone knows it's part of Palomar as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of a whole health system. Yeah.
And you work on a campus with a lot of other healthcare providers that all
Exactly.
work for Palomar Health?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, when I work in the anticoagulation service, I'm working at Arch Health, and everyone, for the most part, that works there is an Arch Health employee. But I'm actually a Palomar Health employee when I'm in there. So I'm actually one of the few who I don't know exactly how it differs as far as, because I know Palomar has a affiliation with them, but I don't know exactly, when the money comes out, it first goes to Arch and then trickles down to them. I don't know how that structure works, but officially I'm a Palomar employee, but I do work at Arch sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And you've been with Palomar now for 5 years.
correct.
Okay. And the first year was your residency, and since then, 4 years as a pharmacist.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And you are still considered a pharmacist when you're in residency, just an underpaid pharmacist.
Underpaid. I've heard medical students sing that
Yeah.
song.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're a pharmacist and that's your career.
Uh,
But I also noticed, on your Instagram that, you've got other interests as well. You depict or you describe yourself as a financial freedom advocate. What
y-
do you mean by that?
so yeah, I've always been interested in personal finance, in investing. I think the topics have always just kind of naturally drew my interest in addition to the scientific side of things. I guess I've always had a little bit of a entrepreneur in me and kind of always naturally been good with numbers. Um, and I think, and this comes down to everyone views the world very differently into what they value. But I think it's a very weird societal construct that we have where in many cases people work all the way until the age where they can claim Social Security, which is 67 years old at this point, is your full retirement age. And in many cases, you don't have your full health and energy at that point anymore to really enjoy the reward of the wealth you maybe have accumulated over the past 40 or so years that you were working. So um, for me personally, I'm someone who really has a lot of that delayed gratification that we were talking about earlier, where I really try to live very modestly and within my means. And I really am aware of how quickly money compounds when you start saving up a good amount. It's really like a snowball that kind of just starts rolling out of control. Um, and I think it comes down to, in many cases, there's two different beliefs of how people view money. People either view money, money is meant to be spent. And then the other people say that money is meant to create more money. And that's where whenever I see money, I'm not thinking, what can I buy with it? I'm thinking, where can I put that money where it's going to generate me more money in the long run? And ultimately, the underarching goal is to be able to retire. The age I've set for myself right now is 46, that I'm trying to retire at, and essentially live a decent life. It's if I retired much later, obviously I could live more lavishly, but that's not as important to me as having that time to really enjoy the things that I want. And ultimately, for me, the definition of financial freedom is the money that your investments are kicking off is more passive income than your expenses are monthly. So once you've kind of hit that point where your investments are spitting off more money than your monthly expenses, you've hit the point where, if you so choose, you don't have to work anymore if you don't want. And I think that's really powerful. And I don't think a lot of people realize that there is a different way than we've been taught. Everyone's been taught that you work and you work and you work until Social Security, and that's the only way, and there's no other way.
No, I couldn't agree more. And it is truly freedom, like financial freedom, the ability to not rely on, for your employer for before you're 67 and then the federal government after you're 67. It's liberating. And, you know, like you said, it's not something that's kind of ingrained in us or even taught to us as directly or as repeatedly as, say, work for your job 9 to 5, be a part of the, you know cog or be a cog in the wheel, and you know eventually you'll retire when you're old. But you made a great point, like, what is our quality of life at that point? We're What's our health going to be like? And did we just waste the last 40 years of our life working and spending money obnoxiously, and now here we're kind of stressed out and really relying on others for our well-being?
Exactly. And I think in the end, it really comes you know, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier about how I had, you know, the goal, for example, of, you know, going to pharmacy school, and that was the goal. And I'm, you know, trying to achieve that goal, and it's pushing me because I want to get to that goal. And you see progress, and it just motivates you even more because you see the goal closer. And I feel like that's the same thing with retirement, that I feel like very few people that are around our age even think about retirement in any way. It's just, it's a complete afterthought. Whereas if you kind of did the math and looked at, you know, based on your lifestyle and how you're trying to live, I really feel like everyone should try to calculate how much they think they want to spend a month. You reverse engineer that to, you know, how much money you need to have saved up. And then, you know, let's say you need $1 million as your number that you need to reach. And let's say you're assuming, you know, that your investment is going to get 5% interest or something. So that would be $50,000, you know, per year. So how long is it going to take you to reach that $1 million net worth? And then you kind of track that net worth over time. So I have different apps on my phone. One I really recommend is called Personal Capital. You essentially input all of your different accounts, anything from credit cards to student loan accounts, to car loans, to checking and savings accounts, your retirement accounts, your if you have an HSA account, anything that has to do with money, you all input that into the app, and it tracks your net worth. It does a bunch of other amazing things as well. But essentially, you know, I've been using that app for maybe 3 years now, so I have a good sense of, you know, the trajectory of my net worth. So I have, you know, assumptions based on if I'm able to, you know, work at the same level I am right now, you know, when I'm going to reach that goal number, which, you know, in my case, the number I set for myself is $2.5 million. So I think if I really put my mind to it, I can hit it by 46. Sure, there could be roadblocks in the way, but if everything goes to plan, I think it's a realistic goal.
Good luck. I hope you reach that goal.
Yeah,
Even younger, you could reach that goal possibly.
it is. Yeah, I'd kind of say the range is 40 to 50 for retirement. So there's obviously a sort of error because there's so many variables, right, that you just can't predict. So I'm setting a number right now, but ultimately, you know, things will, I'm sure, have to be updated, you know, whether for the better or the worse.
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
sure, you know, well, things will come along, marriage, kids, who knows, something tragic, or hopefully not, but possibly.
exactly. It could happen. You never know.
Never know.
Yeah.
And like you said, you know, our age, people our age, we're not talking about retirement or, you know, financial freedom. We're talking more about where'd you travel to? Uh, you know, a lot of traveling, a lot of what did you do, you know, and it's not, you know, it's something that I think another thing that's also been delayed is the onset of having children for our age. And I think that has played a part in us not being able to see this reality that having financial freedom and being financially stable, and even, you know, I think retirement is thinking even into a future sense of that, like, you know, being well off for your entire life when you're not able to provide for yourself anymore, um, is important. And we don't talk about it. And we don't talk about how we're in the peak of our livelihood right now. Like, if we want to learn, this is the best time for us to learn and gain those skills that can possibly get us more money in 5 to 10 years down the line. And if we're not aware of the fact that, you know, our skills might drop off, our ability to learn new skills will drop off. You know, that snowball effect, if you start it in 2 to 3 years, it's going to be a lot harder to reach, you know, a goal within a reasonable amount of time, because it just hasn't compounded enough or avalanched enough. And we need to think about this ASAP if we want to be well off in 20 years.
I agree, and I'd be curious to see your insight on what you think contributes to the our lack of doing that. What can we do differently to I guess as a society to make it where people are set up to live the lives that they want to do.
It's it it's tough because we have, there's a lot of safety nets, and with those safety nets in place, people feel they're, it's not an issue to really just kind of not worry about making money and finding a home and providing.
Do you think, for example, when I think of safety net, I think of Social Security. So do you think people have in many cases, a false assumption that you kind of just work to the age that you get to Social Security, and then that's going to kind of take over at that point, and then that's kind of your income for the rest of your life at that point. So it's just a matter of working until that income kicks in, and people have this false perception of really how much money they get, I guess, in Social Security and things like that? Or is it I guess, a culture that's driven by social media and showing off your flashy clothes or car or whatever?
That too, that for sure has played a part. I think one thing as far as a safety net for me is at the education, the safety net of education. Our federal we currently implement. Um, if someone wants to, they can, you know, go into school for 5 years and not make money for 5 years and not worry about it, and make a small amount of money, not very much, maybe, not even really a starting salary's worth, but enough to get by, and be in that program for many years and just delay the real onset of creating capital where they can actually start making money for their future spouse, for their future children. And I think that's the big one right now, because I hear a lot of people say, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I should go back to school. Whereas you, on the other hand, knew you wanted to be a pharmacist from before you even, really were an undergrad. And so that's like a whole different reasoning to go and spend 4 years of your youth, as well as, you know, countless, a lot of money, and your, 4 years of your youth, countless amount of hours in there. There was a goal at the end, whereas a lot of people, I feel, are going into school. They don't see a goal at the end. They just know that it's easier than having to start building financial freedom, building, even freedom with their relationships, which comes from feeling financially secure as well. So I think education right now is a big one.
It definitely does. You know, the further and further we go in education, the later our life starts. So obviously that does push you back. I mean, my parents both had a house at my age, and they obviously weren't as well educated as I was. So you think that I would be getting a house sooner, but there's a lot of different other reasons for that too. I mean, obviously the housing market in San Diego is just absurd. Um,
Crazy.
yeah,
Wow. And yeah, it's exact. There's a lot of reasons. It's not as easy, I think, to
it's
be.
very complex. Yeah,
Yeah. There's a lot of nothing. It's very complex. There's no simple answers. And I don't know, hopefully we'll we'll see what happens. I think There's going to be a shift in the workforce soon too, where a lot of baby boomers are going to be shifting out, and then a lot of millennials are going to be shifting into the workforce.
Yeah.
Even I believe millennials already out have there are more millennials in the workforce than Gen Xers.
Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
There might be more millennials in general than Gen Xers too, but I believe in the workforce specifically,
Uh,
millennials are outnumbering them.
yeah. It's not completely surprising. Yeah. It seems like when you say there's a bigger number of it, is it partly that the age range that a millennial is defined at is a bigger amount of years than the Gen Xers, or is it?
It might be, and I feel that might be true too,
Uh-huh.
because I've seen millennials defined from like I think Gen Xers are 75 to 85.
Uh-huh.
Baby boomers have a very
It's like a
long,
20-year range, right? Like
yeah,
85 to '05, or no, wait, no,
55 to 75.
no, for millennials. So this would be, I think I've heard as early as, I don't know, the early '80s to the late
Dude,
'90s, maybe. I don't know.
I've heard that too.
Yeah.
Millennials, that's it. That might be a reason too. I didn't think about that because they have a much larger time span than the Gen X, which is called the lost generation as
Yeah.
well.
And it's all kind of arbitrary, I guess, too, those numbers. And I feel like if you look at different places, there's not a set guideline of what the years are. I think people kind of all have their own interpretation of exactly what it is, but that definitely could, I guess, skew things. I was just kind of thinking of what you said earlier about the workforce and the reasons why that could be. But yeah, it's interesting.
It is interesting. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the coming 10 to 15 years. So you are also the co-founder of the Rokwoan Property Group.
Yes.
What
So
is the Rokwoan Property Group?
yeah, so it's definitely evolved. My interest in real estate in particular came about in the past year. Um, Initially, when I first started learning about different things, my interest was more geared towards single family homes. As most people would, it just seems like the most obtainable goal to invest in a house as opposed to a shopping center or a apartment, or you think things like that and you just think like, oh, I could never do that. So that was my initial goal, and it slowly evolved into being more excited about and interested in multifamily or apartment investing, which is where most of my focus is now. Um, it's a very interesting and very complex field in that. So it's evolved many times what we've been trying to do. So the RoKhoan Property Group is still in its infancy right now. So it's not like this multi-million-dollar company or anything like that. Initially, what we want to do is what's called a apartment syndicator. So essentially, we would find an apartment building that we think would be a good investment. We would have all of these different systems in place to do our due diligence on the property, make sure that everything checks the boxes of what we think is a good investment. We create relationships with different lenders, meaning big banks or government agencies, like I'm sure you've heard of Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, who back a lot of the mortgages, getting a loans from them for the property, and then ultimately having a group of investors who are interested in investing in your project. So let's say I have 10 different people who I've created relationships with, who have expressed interest in wanting to invest in an apartment building. And then I find one that we want to purchase. And essentially I send them all the details of it, and we pool all of our money together to take down an apartment building as opposed to a single family home. And the reason for that is I think there's a lot of efficiencies that are created by buying a apartment building, just to name a few. So you have all of your tenants in one location. So if you were to buy 20 houses versus a 20 unit apartment building, you could have 20 different houses all over San Diego. So if something is breaking or you need to meet with people, you're running all around town to fix all these different, problems. Second, the amount of things that can break is severely diminished. So you only have one, assuming it's one building, you only have one roof. For example, a roof could be, on a house, a $6,000 to $8,000 repair, and you have 20 different roofs if you have single family homes. So there's a lot different things that can nickel and dime you over time. And then you ultimately just have that economies of scale that any large corporation is going to have over a small one. There's just efficiencies that are created by having one process in one building, and it's all seamless together. And I really feel like there's especially in our generation, a big shift to renting. I think we've kind of covered in many cases why that may be, but the amount of renters it doesn't seem like it's letting up. There's also a lot of immigrants that are coming to the country who are more likely to rent as well compared to purchase. So I feel like there's a lot of things that are keeping demand very strong for the rental, specifically apartments.
I think so too. I think the demand for rent, if it did go down at any point during COVID, it's only going to shoot right back up and probably be even more in demand than before. I have a couple of questions. What is your job? So do you consider yourself a manager, or or an investor, or what is your role with the Rokwoan Property Group?
So the biggest barrier right now that we're trying to overcome is in order to get lending from one of these big banks or agencies like Fannie or Freddie, is you need experience. And it's kind of like that catch-22 of you're trying to get a job, but you don't have experience, but it says experience needed. So how do you overcome that? So the way you do overcome it is you can partner with someone else. So right now we're really trying to create a lot of different relationships with people. And ultimately we haven't found a partner yet, but like I said, we're kind of in our infancy right now. So this is a relationship that you don't want to rush. It's almost like a marriage, so you want to make sure you're going into business with the right people. So that is the goal, is to eventually find someone who is maybe just a couple steps ahead of where we are, but where we want to be. And essentially, we want to be able to bring something to the table that they don't have, that makes us an asset to them and creates value, where both of us combined are better than each of us would be on our own. So that is what we're looking for right now. And we're looking first, I think, to passively invest in some other apartment syndicators deals where we're the people giving them money to invest in the projects. And I think down the line, it will ultimately come to fruition where we're the operators who are finding the deals, and people are giving us, their money to invest in the apartment. But as far as when that will happen, it could be 6 months, it could be years away. I don't know. We'll have to ultimately see. And that's one of the big things that I will say too, that will ultimately affect the retirement age we were saying earlier. Maybe it could be 40, maybe it could be 50. So there's a lot of variables there.
There are a lot of variables, but I think adding a second possible source of financial income compared to your general role as a pharmacist is possibly going to drop that number, that retirement number down more likely than, keep on working hard and chugging at your primary role.
Absolutely. There's really the thing that interests me as well with the apartment investing is there's really no limit to what you can achieve. There's a lot of different people whose podcasts I listen to, and they have over $1 billion of assets under management of apartment buildings, thousands and thousands of units. And the thing with apartments is it would be just nuts to try to buy that many houses where you're saying like, I have $1 billion of houses. Just, I've been through I haven't closed on a deal yet, but I went through the closing process, and it's such like a long, arduous paperwork, driven process that I couldn't imagine just going through that constantly. So just being able to buy one building with, some of these bigger guys are buying 200, 300, $400 or 400 unit buildings. So they don't directly own, all of it. Obviously the investors own, a good portion, maybe 70% of it or 75%, whatever they agreed on in the investment. But you can see how quickly your income can really scale when you're buying 400 unit apartments at a time.
That I never that yes, you can see how it can scale very quickly when you're getting 400 different sources of income from supposedly one piece of property.
Exactly. It's kind of mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling. I never thought about it until you mentioned that maybe, less than 10 minutes ago, how much easier it is. Because like, I know someone who has two different properties, one in LA, one in San Diego, and they went through hell trying to get, they don't live in LA. So they were trying to go out and fix that one up. And then, their house isn't there. It's in San Diego. So they were driving, anytime they needed to fix that. And then even say they were both in San Diego, they're still in two different locations. It could take you 45 minutes to get from one to the other. And that's a huge waste of time.
Yeah.
And so that's what was it that changed your mind from single family homes to multifamily homes?
Yeah. The biggest word is definitely scalability. That, I think we had or still have big goals as far as what we can achieve. And we really saw that it was just the upside was really capped if we went the single family route, and that there was really no cap to our upside. If we went the apartment, is really the sky's the limit, literally, in that field.
What podcasts are you listening to regarding owning apartments?
Yeah, so some of my favorites have been Joe Fairless. He's probably the one I've gained the most information from. He also has this syndication school series on his website where I've listened to tons of little clippets of podcasts where essentially he teaches you the whole process of how to syndicate an apartment building. So I pretty much know how to do everything, I feel like, at this point.
Joe Fairless?
Joe Fairless, yeah. So some others is Michael Blanc. Bigger Pockets is probably the most popular podcast. They're not, they do multifamily things. Like every episode is different, but they're the kind of the authority on real estate investing. They're like the biggest website, the biggest podcast. So everyone knows Bigger Pockets if you're in the real estate community. So definitely on their website, looking at the blogs, things like that, making connections on Bigger Pockets. But the Michael Blanc and Joe Fairless are specifically multifamily or apartment geared.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That is a really lofty goal I mean, that's a whole new industry, real estate. How did you get interested in that? And you're a co-founder, so you have another co-founder that you work with?
Yeah. So it's my buddy from pharmacy school. His name is John Kwan. So he's the other part of Ro is part of my last name, and then Kwan is his last name. So that's Rokwoan. But I've always had an interest in investing. It's always just been something that's been interesting to me. So I've always been researching stocks and things like that. And I still like, looking at stocks and things like that. But one, I wanted to diversify where all of my holdings were not just in the stock market where, I'm getting too close to a retirement age and I have a 50% drop in, stock prices, and that could really delay what you're trying to do. So I wanted something that I could control my destiny a little bit more, because with the stock, you're really just buying another person's company and you have no say over what's going on. If things aren't going well, you can't turn it around. You can sell your stock, but the price might have the damage is already done. But in real estate, if the asset is not performing the way you want it, you have the ability to go in and solve whatever problem is causing you to hemorrhage money, or whatever the problem is, and ultimately fix that. So you're in control of the asset much more, and then it's something that always has inherent value, whereas a stock is just a piece of paper in the end. So it could go to zero at any second if the company goes bankrupt. But I mean, even if an apartment building, even if you lost all your tenants and it wasn't generating any income from rent, there's always going to be value in a physical building. That's never going to go away unless it's, just awful, condition. Maybe it's not worth much. But as long as you're doing the maintenance on it, there's always going to be some value in that building itself. So it gives you a little bit of risk protection, I feel like, to the downside of having some of your capital allocated to real estate. And even though I'm really, into real estate, I would never encourage someone to put, let's say 50%, more than 50% of their, their assets in real estate, for example. I feel like you would want to cap it at that at the max. I think my number is closer to 40 is my goal of the amount of capital I want allocated to real estate. But it's ultimately a diversifier too.
Nice. That's a good way of thinking about it. So are you still invested in stocks?
Yes. The bulk of it though is through my retirement account at work. So I always max my retirement account every year. So you can put 19,500 into a retirement account every year. And there's a lot of tax advantages of doing that. So I always make sure to max that, and all of that money is where the bulk of my stock investments is. I also have what's called a health savings account, where you can kind of think of this as a health retirement plan where it rolls over every year. And once you hit a certain point, like $2,000 or something like that, anything over that amount, you can invest in stocks or things like that. So it's like a card you would use, if you went to the pharmacy or the doctor, you'd, spend your money. That's what like the $2,000 of cash in the account is. And anything over that $2,000 of cash is, money you can invest in stocks, and it just rolls over every year. So I think you can contribute as a single person $3,500 a year into that. And there's different rules as far as who can get these accounts and not. I think you have to be on what's called a high deductible health plan. And that's probably a whole different conversation in itself, but they offer a high deductible health plan at my work. So I signed up for the HSA, and especially for someone in my tax bracket, you want to try and minimize your tax bill at the end of the year as much as possible. So putting as much of your money into retirement and HSA accounts, I feel like is a good way to shield yourself from some of that tax liability. And ultimately, my goal is to pull that money out when hopefully I'm making less than I am now, so that the tax liability is not as big when I pull that money out. And it's also giving it however many years to compound on itself without ever paying the taxes on it. So it's going to be much bigger in the end.
Wow. That's $19,000 every year.
Yes.
Is that the legal cap, like by the state or the federal government?
So there's a lot of different accounts. I I believe that is the cap. I don't have a 401k. I have what's called a 457B, which my understanding is you have to be either a nonprofit or a government institution, I believe, to have that type of account. So it has a little bit different rules, but it also has a $19,500 cap is for 2021. It goes up a little bit every year for inflation. But I believe there's other types of retirement accounts that other employers may offer where the cap may be different. But for a lot of people, that would be the cap,
Okay, got it.
depending
And
on your account.
the investments you have, are you planning on taking them out at the age of, 40 to 50?
So kind of my tentative plan right now is I kind of have, you have different buckets, essentially is how I think of it. So you have your bucket of cash that's your personal money that's not in retirement accounts. So, when I retire at 46, I'm mainly going to be using that bucket. But when I say using that bucket, you don't want to spend the principal of your investment, because then you're just dwindling how much money. You only want to try and spend the money that your investment kicks off. So let's say I have $1 million of money that's not in retirement accounts at 46, and I'm generating a 8% return from that $1 million. So that's giving me $80,000 of interest of cash flow every year. So that would, hopefully cover my expenses. And then once I hit a certain age, then I would be able to draw from those retirement accounts, which in my case, I could be wrong on this, but I believe for the 457 that I have, I'm actually able to withdraw from that account before 59 and a half, which most people have to wait for a 401k for 59 and a half to draw without getting like a 10% penalty, I believe. But with this account, I believe I can draw from it early as long as I'm not employed with Palomar anymore. So if I ever need it for some reason, I can. It's kind of a backup safety net. And then you ultimately have your Social Security, which that's just kind of an extra buffer, so to say. And I've done some math on it, and I've went on the Social Security website. And essentially, my advice for people is if you're going to claim your Social Security and you think you're going to live past 80 years old, what I found is it seems to make the most sense to take it the last year you can, which is 70, because the difference between taking it at 62 for 70 is almost a twofold increase in the amount you make per month. So if you take it at 62, you might be making $1,600 or $1,700 a month, depending on how much you made during your career, of course. But let's say you're making $1,600 to $1,700 a month. If you were to pull it at 62, if you were to claim Social Security at 70, you probably get closer to 3,000 a month. So, I mean, it's night and day. So it's really important, I feel like, to have the assets and capital to, push you to where you have to claim that is as late as possible, assuming that your life expectancy is not shorter. If your life expectancy, you had a lot of chronic conditions and you thought realistically that you weren't going to live past 75, then it would make sense to take it earlier. But that is kind of like the last piece of the puzzle. There's the non-retirement accounts, and then there's the retirement accounts that kind of kick in around 59 for most people. And then there's the Social Security around 70. So you kind of slowly have more money over time. But that may, with inflation, it may be the same quality of life, that you were living at 59, 11 years later, 11 years of inflation, Social Security kicks in, you may still be living at the same level you were at 59. It's hard to know, depending on how severe inflation is.
Yes, it is hard to know. And that can be, 40 years in the future for some of us. So there's a lot, you just can't really depend on that. And we
Yeah,
kind of,
exactly. You be as conservative as possible in your estimates, where you're not taking the best case scenario. You're really taking the almost worst case scenario, and you're like looking at that worst case scenario, and you're saying to yourself, am I still happy with that? And if you are, then you're in a good spot. If your worst case scenario is still something that you would be comfortable, living at.
yes, that's a smart practice that I feel many people ignore is, looking at the worst case scenario and really working with that instead of the scenario, or an ideal scenario. Because an ideal scenario usually doesn't happen, but
Yeah,
neither does a worst scenario. But at least if you work with that, everything else will be, you'll be prepared for whatever's going to come.
definitely.
So, what practices are you implementing now to retire by 40 to 50?
Um, let's see if I can make this think of this in a structured way. The overarching themes. So for me, I'd say the overarching themes is one, uh, putting as much into retirement accounts as possible. And let me first say that this is specific to my specific, um, everyone's different as far as the situation they're in. If I was making half as much as I am, my goals would be different, because if I was investing 19,000 in my retirement, I may not have much money left over after that. So for me, it's people in my income range, it would be more applicable to. This isn't going to be for everyone, but for me, it's maximizing the retirement accounts as much as possible. Really living within my means. I have a expense tracker that I update every month or so of all my recurring monthly expenses. So right now, my average expenses, I think, is around $2,800 a month,
Nice.
which for someone with my income is very low. I would say most people spend a lot more
I think so. Does that
than that.
include rent?
That includes rent and student loans.
That is
Yeah.
super low, dude. Nice work. That's
Yeah. So
lower than mine for
yeah,
sure.
1,000 of that is actually student loans that I'm paying my parents back. So once that's paid off, it would only be $1,800 a month.
Oh,
So
wow.
I really, I've tried to squeeze every dollar out of it as possible. Not that I don't have fun. I mean, I still go out to eat. These are the expenses that are things that are inevitable that I'm going to have to spend money on. And then obviously I allocate a little bit money for, fun and things like that. That doesn't go into the $2,800. That's kind of I personally don't have to set budgets on things like that, because I don't.
Do it very often.
I'm able to control myself, I guess you would say. I feel like some people would have to set a budget where they'd say, like, I'm only going to spend, $500 a month on food and entertainment, or things like that, which I honestly couldn't even tell you exactly how much I spend a month on food entertainment, but whatever it is, it's something that I'm comfortable with. So I try not to worry about that too much, because I feel like that's kind of a turnoff for a lot of people when they think of budgets, is I'm not going to be able to have fun or anymore. But it's really more just being aware of. It's similar to, if you're trying to lose weight, you need to step on the scale every day. You need to actually see what's happening, because if you don't see what's happening, how are you going to know what's going on? So I have all my annual subscriptions, monthly subscriptions, so that if I'm looking at it and like, I don't really use that anymore, I'll cancel that. So you're really aware of where you can slash things if they're not useful to you anymore.
That tracking, that metrics budget tracking is huge. I use Mint, uh
Yes.
and I mean, I don't know where I would be. I mean, I would be clueless, frankly, if I didn't have that tool. And it sounds like Personal Capital is a very good tool that I'm going to check out as
It's
well.
very similar. So I used Mint for a while before I found out about Personal Capital. Essentially, Personal Capital, I would say, is just a more powerful version of Mint. But at the basic level, they do similar things. But if you're trying to look more at, I haven't been on Mint in a while, so maybe it's better now. But if you're trying to look at your asset allocation, as far as what percent you're invested in international equities versus domestic equities, and then looking at your international equities, what percentage of those are from developed countries versus emerging markets. And it gives you all of those percentages from the accounts that you have, linked in to that. And it gives you a lot of wonderful graphs, and it really helps for rebalancing. If one asset starts to get overweight in your portfolio, or it's a much bigger percentage than you want, it's very easy to see, oh, this is how much, I need to sell of this and buy something else so that my portfolio is, more balanced again, as far as the risk reward profile. So that's, if you're into that, it's super powerful.
That sounds like a very powerful tool for an investor. I think Mint might be more. I would like to check out Personal Capital just for my own sake, but Mint, I don't think has those capabilities. It's much
Yeah, the
more.
net worth stuff though is for someone just starting out in the personal finance. I think tracking your net worth is something everyone should be doing, because ultimately that's the number that is going to guide when you can retire or not. So always finding a way, how do I grow that net worth, whether it's, where can I slash expenses, or where can I generate more income, whether it's, increasing the money I get from my job or creating other passive side hustles on the side, figuring out a way to make that number grow as much as possible.
It's huge, vital. And I'm happy that, you're a stickler for keeping that in your, forefront of your awareness. A lot of people aren't even interested in starting that adventure.
Yeah, I've always been curious about it, if it's just interest or what it is, but it really is not something a lot of people either like to talk about or really practice, I guess. But I find it fascinating. So it's very easy for me. It's not like it's dry and boring that I guess maybe a lot of people would assume it is. I feel like it's almost like a game to me, where it's, how do you succeed? It's like a strategy game, right? It's developing a strategy of, what percent of stocks do I want? What type of real estate do I want? What is my goal of when I want to retire? And then kind of reverse engineering all those numbers of what do you have to get to so that those investments are spitting off the cash flow that you want every month, so that you can live at your desired quality of life.
I that's a really I think helpful way of looking at this venture, creating capital, creating financial freedom. um what was that, you just used a word? It's a game, or it's a
Strategy game.
strategy. Exactly, it's strategy, just trying to figure out different types of ways, and there's so many different ways that it can happen.
Oh, there's billions probably. Yeah,
Billions.
yeah.
And it can be daunting. I mean, if for example, your Rokwoan Group, like you're saying they want, it's like applying for jobs where they're asking for experience, but you have no experience yet.
Yeah. So how do you get around that obstacle? And there's a lot of ways to do it, but it's all, again, it's a strategy. You hit an obstacle, and what is your strategy to get around that obstacle? And a lot of people, I think this is something very important that I should emphasize that I haven't talked about yet, is really the most important thing that everything in your life comes down to is your mindset. Your mindset is everything, because your mindset and your beliefs, that's what's going to dictate your actions every day. And your actions ultimately dictate your results. So if your mindset is, I'm poor, I'm always going to be poor, and I don't think I could ever be a millionaire, then you're going to do things and act certain ways that only poor people would do. For like, here's like a great example. Let's say you have something that you need to return, at the store, and it was $5 and it's 20 minutes across town. Frankly, that's not worth my time to spend an hour driving to that store, spending $3 of gas and getting my $5 return for that item. If I'm already in the area, great. But you're thinking like a poor person. I feel like if you're going out of your way you made $2 an hour in that situation, where I'm thinking, if I just worked an hour as a pharmacist, I would have made way more than that. So why would I waste my time doing things like that? So it's this mindset of having a bigger picture and looking at everything in your daily life and like, would a millionaire act this way? Or am I doing something a poor person would be doing? And if you there's a million different choices you have to make every second in your life. But if your mindset is that of whatever it is, we could be talking about any different type of subject, but whatever your mindset is on that subject is going to dictate your actions and ultimately deliver the results in the end of what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Everything we experience is a mind state. And that's a great way of putting it. That's a very, it's tough to get over that bias of losing, even if it is only $5.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't want to lose $5. Like I can
Yeah.
get that back. And it's like, it's also very like defined form of keeping money. Like I know that I'm going to lose $5, or I know that I'm going to get my $5 back. And that, just knowing that I'm going to have $5 and knowing I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to get some form of money, even if it's minuscule, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's actually you're losing money gaining that money, it's hard to overcome that.
Yeah. And
And
a
you
good example in the real estate world is, if you have a tenant who's not paying and you're trying to evict them, in many cases, people develop these salty feelings for these people, and they want to, they've been a nuisance in their life, so they want to, get revenge on them, and they want to take them to court or something like that to recoup the rent they weren't paying and something like that. And in many cases, it's the wrong decision, because those people normally don't even have the ability to pay, even if you win your court battle. So you spent all your time and money at court wasting when you could have been working and doing something else productive. So some of the best people that I've learned from, in these different podcasts, they do something called cash for keys, which it's essentially swallowing your pride and doing the best business decision, even if it's not personally made what you want to do. And the strategy is, if someone's not paying, you offer them, let's say $500 for them to give you the keys to the place and move out. So you're giving them money. They've already not been paying, but then you're giving them more money to just say, hey, move out. And most people wouldn't be able to do something like that, but that could easily be the best decision, especially if you're in a place like California where it takes months and months to evict someone. You could get them out that day and then get another renter in next week who's actually paying the rent. So in the end, it's the right business decision, even though it's really hard for some people to swallow their pride and do something like that.
Wow. And that it is hard. I think for me it would be hard too. Then that's legal. That's a legal practice, cash for keys.
Yes.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
It's worth doing, and I think you kind of have to be told and reminded, mostly told at the beginning, but also reminded that, if you want to create wealth and maintain wealth and you want it to scale, there is going to be a point where, you can't think like the average person in terms of your time and capital.
Exactly. Your time is very valuable.
Very valuable. And you just can't waste it.
Yeah. And kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier about having all the, you said your friend, had two, single family homes, and it was taking a lot of their time or whatever. But you really have to treat everything like, you have to run it like a business, or it's going to run you. Because you only can imagine, if those two were that much of a time sink, how would they manage if they had 30 different rentals? And obviously they could do it, but they would have to put certain systems in place that make it much easier to achieve that. And obviously, since there's only two houses right now, they haven't felt enough pain to worry about developing those systems yet. But once the pain gets bad enough, say adding more houses, it gets to a point where the pain will eventually lead you to say, okay, I need to develop these systems that will alleviate all of these time and, allow me to do, this much more efficiently than I'm doing right now. And you only can imagine, if you had hundreds of units, it's only more important of the systems you have to have in place so that, essentially you don't even have to be there. The business is just running itself.
And you're gaining capital while you sleep.
Exactly.
Those systems, I mean, they're very tough to implement, and you really have to fine tune those over time and experience.
Definitely.
Taylor, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you for coming on. Is there any last things regarding, financial freedom, regarding people's well-being, that, or anything at all that you'd like to tell the listeners?
Not in particular. I mean, I think you can tell that I'm passionate about, personal finance, about real estate, about investing in general. I'm passionate about the mindset that gets you there. So if anyone has, any interest in that, feel free to reach out, and I love to chat about those things.
We'll definitely link your bio in the description. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast, Taylor. It was a pleasure.
I appreciate the opportunity to come on here.
Welcome. See you.
Take care.